You are blessed to have a pastor like Pastor Cole.
Yes.
Indeed, yeah, because he wants you to get all the information so you can make informed decisions, and what a blessing that is. And it's been such a blessing for me because I've been able to stay in your parsonage, or whatever you call it, Prophet's Chamber, the house over there, ever since Thursday, because I was in town for the homeschool convention. So I had a booth like that at the convention, and I also spoke there. And so, yeah, it's going to be a blessing. And my heart sunk when I saw Josh start to leave. It's like, no, he needs to see this. And so I'm glad that he's back, and we'll try and keep you awake, Josh. But yeah, I've got some material in the back. I'll cover more of this during the Sunday service. But yeah, we're here to talk about errors in our textbooks. And I was at a table one time with lunch with there's a state senator, a state representative, and a city council president, and I happened to be there. And one of them said, "Don't make the homeschoolers mad, they're organized." And I thought, yeah. And I thought, why don't they say that about the church? You know, because we kind of focus on what divides us, while the whole time we're paying for these lies to teach our kids that there's no God. So I thought if we could just unite around that, and even taxpayers too, it's like we don't want errors taught to our kids. And so, yeah, if we could do that, get it straightened up in a few years, and then go back to dividing it, whatever. But so we're going to, last year I went through our school curriculum. They gave me the passcode that it's an online book. So I went through and I was able to see what they were teaching. And I pointed out a lot of errors to our curriculum director. And she emailed back and said, well, basically we're just teaching the state standards. And I asked her, well, what standard says we're 1.6% different from chimpanzees? And she did not respond, but the superintendent did. And she said, we're in the process of reviewing your concern and our response with the publisher so they could fix it? No, with our district's law firm. They contacted a law firm. It's like, just contact the publisher, it's free. And so, but keep in mind, in St. Cloud, only 1 in 4 students can do math or science at the state standard. Only 1 in 3 can read at the state standard. And yet this superintendent was Superintendent of the Year last year. So they're rewarding failing schools. So that tells me the Minnesota Department of Education does not value education. Amen. And so I went to the school board, and I asked them if they would do something. And I've got a playlist for the school board so you can hear all these comments. And I went in there assuming everybody wants accurate textbooks. And that's not the case. But what this did do, it put them on notice. You know there's errors in there. And if somebody wants that school board spot, they can say, hey, I want accurate textbooks. Vote for me. And hopefully we can get that flipped. And sometime in there, I went at a booth at the state fair, at the county fair, and trying to get people to realize, hey, we're paying for lies. And the question of the day was, should St. Cloud ISD 742 remove errors in our textbooks? And then they got to see the errors, and it was 52-10, 5-1, get them out of there. And somebody from the curriculum committee walked by, and we started talking. And she said, well, and I said, how come I wasn't, my name was on that committee list, how come nobody called me? And she's talking, she said, well, this is the best curriculum we can find. And I said, yeah, you can make it better by getting the errors out of the textbooks. And she said, well, she told me I could contact the publisher. And I said, well, so could you. You could contact the publisher too. And she said, no, I can't do that. I might lose my job. So a teacher can't point out errors in the textbooks. And at that point in time, I realized teachers aren't educators, they're bureaucrats. They're going to teach whatever the state tells them to teach, even if it's wrong. Even if she knows it's wrong, they're going to teach it. So let's go through some of the stuff that's in the textbooks. This is from their textbooks, or what is science? And I spend a lot of time at St. Cloud State, and they say, I believe in science, not the Bible. So I say, well, what do you mean by science? And it's basically, and they stumble. It's like, well, let's do the scientific method. It's observable, testable, repeatable, falsifiable, and then they agree. And I'll say, well, the evolution's none of that. We can't see amoebas turning into elephants or monkeys turning into man. It's a belief system. So we both have a belief system, and we can get them that far. So they have just as much faith. They have more faith than I do to believe that stuff. But this is what our textbook that I'm paying for says. The National Academy of Sciences defines science as the use of evidence to construct testable explanations and predictions of natural phenomena. So it's got to be testable. If it's not testable, it's not science. So let's take a look at this. You also have to define evolution. You know, they'll say big dogs, little dogs, therefore we came from monkeys. It's like, no, those are two different forms of evolution. One is on the small scale, one's the big scale. And this is the textbook. It says all life on Earth is related to a common ancestor that existed about 3.8 billion years ago. This process is called evolution. Well, guess what? This process is also called not science. There's no evidence. They can't test that. So here's a quiz. You're going to have to tell me if this is science or not. Every representative form of every known phyla on Earth evolved in the ocean. Is that science? No, it's not testable. Scientists have tracked the lineage of human evolution all the way back to lemur-like creatures. Is that science? No. They can't test that. Not science at all. How about this? For a rock fossil to form, there must be fast, complete burial. Ooh, how about that? Like, can we do that? Can we see that? Well, they've actually been able to do some of that. It happens quickly. So that's a trick question. And so, like the dead deer on the side of the road, is that going to turn into a fossil? No. It's going to get scavenged. It's going to decompose. And yet, the only way a fossil forms is if it is buried rapidly. You know, they put teddy bears in these caves that have water, that have a bunch of mineral, and then the teddy bear turns to stone. So they've done stuff that's fast. And so if it has to be buried rapidly to turn into a fossil, therefore any layer of rock that was laid down rapidly, or any layer that has fossils in it was laid down rapidly. That's the whole geologic column. Okay, that's sign of a flood. Okay, how about this one? If you trace the history of water back billions of years, it is likely that water provided liquid environment for life to begin. Is that science? Can we test that? No, we can't test that. Not science at all. How about this? Somehow, despite this harsh environment, living organisms appeared 3 billion years ago. Can we test that? No, not at all. Okay, so that's not science. And there's this website called evo2.org. You can get $10 million if you can show how a genetic code got inside cells and how cells intentionally self-organize and communicate and then purposely adapt. $10 million. It used to be $1 million if you can show how life began, and they couldn't do it. So if anybody tries to tell you that they've made life in a test tube, they're wrong. Okay, and this I actually agree with. We do not know exactly how or when the first forms of life developed. They don't know. But that's not what the textbook says. This goes on to say the chemicals, the raw ingredients that make up life, were constantly sloshing around, bumping into each other, and combining into new chemistry. Over millions of years, that process can lead to living organisms. No, it can't. That's never been observed, and there's a NASA scientist that affirms that. A NASA scientist admits there's a problem, or water's a problem for life to begin. Because life needs the water, but it can't start in water, so that's a real conundrum. And he asks her the question, she dodges it for a while, and then he brings it back to her and says, whoops.
I think the question is, it posits that water is a challenge for prebiotic evolution, that because it attacks the various molecules involved.
So in some of the prebiotic, thanks, this is something that people think about. Hydration and dehydration reactions are really important in prebiotic chemistry. And so postulating that life could evolve when there is no opportunity for an environmental separation to allow dehydration reactions actually is a problem, and people do address that.
So it is a problem. Did you catch that? It is a problem, and they do address that. And I'm trying to get the school board to address that, and they don't. They won't address it. And so this statement, over millions of years, that process can lead to living organisms, that's false statement number one. We're just going to count them off as we go through. Chemical origins of life. There are a number of theories that attempt to explain the origin of life on Earth. The one with perhaps the most scientific support is sometimes called the prebiotic soup theory. And it goes on and talks about these compounds that are dissolved and they get transported all over the place and they get more complex and the ability to replicate. And that's not going to happen because the water breaks it apart faster than it gets put together. And this is a guy who's got a PhD in chemistry.
We're taught that chemical evolution started in the oceans, but you say that's the last place you'd expect to look. Why?
Well, okay, to build up a big molecule called a polymer from many little molecules called monomers, for instance, proteins from amino acids and DNA or RNA from the nucleotide building blocks, every step of the way, every combination spits out a water molecule. They call that condensation. But if you already have water molecules dissolving these things, then the water would come back and actually break that bond apart. It's called hydrolysis. So if you try to do this in water, it's the hydrolysis, the breaking apart that would happen and not the forming. In fact, chemists who want to make proteins or DNA or RNA, they exclude water as much as they can. They even have water absorbing chemicals to draw out the water. So a primordial ocean is the last place I'd expect to find these polymers forming.
And so I played that at the school board meeting. I got 3 minutes to talk to him, and that was a minute, and I got done, and I said, what degree does your curriculum director have? What degrees do your science teachers have? Do they have PhDs in chemistry, and they understand that life can't start in water? And if not, they should be looking at this. And then I even asked and then I lost access to the books. They wouldn't let me look at them anymore. And so I emailed the curriculum director. I said, could you or the publisher please send me a link to the scientific paper that shows how life began in water to validate what we were teaching our students? And that was in November, and she never got back to me. And I reminded her of her last week, and I tried to get a link to look at it, and she wouldn't give me a link. I'd have to go in and see it. So they're making it more and more difficult to check on it. And then I even went to the school board. Is there anybody in this room that can validate how life starts in water? And I gave them my phone number. And then I went back again. Is there anybody in the whole school district that can validate what we're doing? And you can see these comments. So this comment here, that's false statement number 2. This one is, you probably figured out that water equals life. It's like, what? Water equals life? And so I went into their definition of life, a minimal definition of life, that the system has to be able to replicate itself. Does water replicate? If you put a half a glass of water on the table at night, is that going to be a full glass? No. So water does not equal life. So that's false statement number 3. And then evidence for evolution, let's look at this 1.6% different from chimpanzees. Well, according to PubMed, it's 5%, and that's 200 million base pairs. The journal Nature says that the common chimp and human Y chromosomes are horrendously different from each other. Horrendously different? No, they're just hugely different. Why is it horrendously? Because it's hard on their theory. But just take a look how they got 1% difference. Now, are they going to manipulate data to do it? Are they going to manipulate fossils to prop it up? Are they going to ignore evidence? You're going to see all that stuff this morning.
If a genetic paragraph, thousands of letters long, appears twice in a human scroll, but only once in its chimp counterpart, should that second human copy count as thousands of changes, or just one? And what about identical paragraphs that appear in both genomes, but in different places, or in reverse order, or broken up into pieces? Rather than monkey around with these difficult questions, the researchers simply excluded all the large mismatched sections, a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours. We may not actually be 99% chimp, but we are 100% great ape, and at least a little bananas.
And that's an evolution website. You can see that on Minute Earth, and what's it called? Are we really 99% chimp? You can see that. So they ignore a third of the data, and they call us 1% different. And, 18% of theirs and 25% of ours, or vice versa. And so they're just manipulating the data to get the answer they want. So this is false statement number 4. And this is I couldn't believe it when I saw these. These are Haeckel's fake drawings. They're real similar to Haeckel's. But notice on the right, it's the bird, the bunny, and the person. On the left, they all look pretty much the same. And then it says animals go through similar stages of development. So they're putting humans and linking us with animals. And God doesn't do that. We got the breath of life in us. We're different from animals. Animals kill each other all the time, but we shouldn't. There's a difference between us, but they just throw it in there, and we got to stop letting them define the terms. We got to take those back again. And it's not science versus religion. It's blind chance versus creator. That's what it is. And blind chance can't do anything. But if you look at these images, and they're real close to Haeckel's fake drawings that he made in the 1870s. And they were proven wrong over 100 years ago. And what did they actually look like? And they don't look anything like what he drew, and they don't look anything like each other. And there's a PhD from Berkeley. We don't have time to play it, but he explains how that's bogus.
If you go,
And then the New Scientist says, 10 years ago, how fudged embryo illustrations led to drawn-out lies. And then it says, it's embarrassing but true. Some of the most influential drawings in the history of biology are wrong, exaggerated to fit a thesis. And in 1997, it says they still appear in reference books such as Gray's Anatomy. And although Haeckel confessed to drawing from memory and was convicted of fraud at the University of Jena, the drawings persist. That's the real mystery. Yeah, why are these fraudulent drawings still in these books? I was at the fair and somebody said, well, they should update the books. And it's like, it's this year's book. It can't get any newer. But let's let Eugenie Scott explain it. She's the president of the National Center of Science Education. Almost 20 years ago, she said this.
And actually, it's been known for 10 or 15 years that Haeckel's embryos are not to be relied upon. The reason why the diagrams are reproduced is because they're easily available. There's no copyright on them. It's an easy way to illustrate a point.
Well, if you have to lie to illustrate a point, I think it's time to get a different point. She says they're unreliable. And it's the wrong point. We did not come from a common ancestor. So that's the point that's wrong. So this is not accurate. Number 5, and we'll look at the evolution of the eye. 400 million years of evolution has been conspiring against you. Does evolution conspire? You know, they're trying to make it like a human. That's the logical fallacy of reification. Give an abstract concept as if it were concrete. You know, evolution can't conspire. So that's false statement number 6. And it says, so why are eyes an engineering nightmare? See, there's an assumption built into that question. I kind of do that all the time at St. Cloud State, but there is an assumption. It should be, are our eyes wired backwards? But they are saying, why are they? And so, and it's like my question at the fair, you know, why are there errors in the textbooks? It makes them, you know, there's an assumption. So this is what their problem is. Herein lies the problems. Our retinas are backwards. We got these photons of light have to travel through these glial cells to get to the photoreceptors. And they say that's backwards. They say octopus and squids have better eyes because those are in front. But they live in the water, and the water filters out the UV light that would make them go blind. We live in the air. If it was wired backwards, we may go blind. Okay, this means that nature invented the camera-like eye twice. Anybody notice the logical fallacy there? Does nature invent? No. So that's false statement number 7. And then scientists haven't been able to come up with a working hypothesis as to why our retinas are set up backwards. And there aren't any scientifically proven positives. Well, not according to the Smithsonian. Here's why your eyes seem to be wired backwards, and this is 10 years ago. They should have known that. They shouldn't be putting this stuff in the book. And I'm just asking, all this stuff is online. It's not like you have to rip pages out. Just take the videos down. They're wrong. Take the videos down. So light has to pass through nerve cells to get to the rods and cones, but that order's no mistake. The glial cells did indeed create columns of concentrated light, and Medical Express goes on to say they're like fiber optic cables. So this, and it concentrates the red and the green, and basically, long story short, this optimization is such that color vision during the day is enhanced, while nighttime vision suffers very little. So there's an incredible design to our eye. So when they say they're set up backwards, that's false statement number 8. When they say there aren't any scientifically proven positives, that's false statement number 9. And Darwin himself said to suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I confess, absurd in the highest degree. And I agree. You're right. This is absurd. And yet the big bangers, the blind chancers, have to believe that this absurd thing happened like 40 times, 30 or 40 times separately. And so that's false. Okay, and then they got hominid evolution. And there's a book on the table back there, Carl Werner. He spent 27 years going to see fossils, taking pictures of them, and interviewing the scientists. And he just released 3 books last year. He had a couple before that, but last year, it's the Untold Stories of Human Evolution. And he claims to have found 150 cases of fraud. And here's more than 200 ape men. Ape men have been disproved. Faced with the fact that more than 200 species of ape men have been disproved may cause some to reasonably doubt the theory of evolution. Yeah, I'm part of that some. I doubt it. And it also says, may come to some It may also cause some to question the ability of the scientists to objectively evaluate any fossil they believe to be an ape man. Yeah, I go along with that too. You don't get money for finding ape ancestors. You get a lot of money for finding human ancestors. And that's, if you get the science you pay for. And we've seen that in a lot of different areas. And it talks about Lucy, and she's an almost complete skeleton. Do you see that? Almost complete. So just imagine an almost complete skeleton. This is Ricores High School. It says it's remarkably complete. You know, we got 200 some bones. This one's nearly complete. How many bones would you need to be nearly complete, almost complete, remarkably complete? About 200? They don't. They got like 40. That's not nearly complete. That's not remarkably complete. That's not almost complete. So that's a false statement number 10. And what did they do to make Lucy walk upright? And I was at the kiosk, and the anthropology department was next. The club was there. I said, do you know that they cut Lucy's hip to turn it from a chimp to a human hip? And she said, no, they didn't. I said, yeah, they did. She said, no, they didn't. And I said, it's on my computer. Do you want to see it? No. Don't want to see it. It's like, my mind's made up. Don't confuse me with the facts, but this is what they did.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bone seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle.
You could read a newspaper through that. That's not perfect.
As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Yeah, I hope so. If you cut it apart and put it back the way you want it, it better look the way you want. So this is all just speculation. And then there's this tree of this, the tree of life. We all came from a single living cell billions of years ago. So humans came from something that turned into a starfish, that came from something that turned into insects, that came from something that turned into mushrooms. It came from something that came from bacteria. Basically, we all came from bacteria. All the plants and animals and people that have ever lived came from bacteria. And they asked Richard Dawkins, what mechanism that adds information into the genome? And he was silent for 20 seconds. And then he said, stop recording. They can't figure it out. And this is Stephen Jay Gould. He says, the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of the branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. So and he admits it. There's no evidence for evolution, the gradual evolution, so he came up with punctuated equilibrium. It just happened fast, and the fossils didn't catch it. And then this is from Niles Eldredge, Mark Pagel, he's doing the book. But instead of finding the slow, smooth, and progressive changes Lyell and Darwin had expected, they saw in the fossil record rapid bursts of change. These species appearing seemingly out of nowhere and then remaining unchanged for millions of years. Patterns hauntingly reminiscent of creation. Yeah, the fossil, what's in the dirt validates what's in the Bible. But they're just blinded by it. I got a book in the back. It's called Living Fossils. You got a live horseshoe crab and a fossil one. And they look identical, and the whole book is like that, and yet the scientists think they're different. Different genus, different species. And you can have such a big variety within dogs, which is the same species, and yet when they look identical, they think they're different species and genus. So this is not accurate, number 11. And then it talks about elephants, but humpback whales are actually more closely related to hippos. Millions of years of mutation and change have given rise to both species from a common ancestor. No, it hasn't. No. And you can go into descentfromdarwin.org, and there's 1,200 PhD scientists who agree that we are skeptical of the claims of the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged. And they're from all over. This is the guys from Harvard. There's from MIT, from Princeton, from UCLA, from Clemson. They're just all over. And evolutionists can't explain it, so they started this new one, thethirdwayofevolution.com, where other mechanisms are essential for a comprehensive understanding of evolutionary processes. And they want alternative ideas to the process. What's that tell us? The processes they have don't work. Creation works, but their processes do not. And so it says that evolution is the unifying theme in biology by most scientists. Well, that may be true, because if you don't agree, you're fired. You know, there's a book out there, Slaughter or Silencing the Darwin Skeptics. Yeah, there's the sacred cow. Yeah, if you disagree with it, you're gone. Most of the times, if not all the times. And then it says humans are animals. I touched on that. I disagree with that. And actually, they're finding that animals are adapting rapidly to their environment. Rapidly. Like these blind cavefish, it's not taking millions of years. They're adapting rapidly. So now they're looking for sensors in the organization, in the organism. And Dr. Randy Galuza does excellent talks on this. And so you see in the creation literature that these changes are regulated, rapid, repeatable, reversible, targeted, and predictable. And that's because there's a sensor in there that's turning them on and off. And guess what? Those same words show up in the evolution textbooks too, in the science journals. He says he's got a file with 600 papers in it that have words like this, where it's not blind chance, which is what they say happened. And then it says species adapt to their environment due to natural selection, but they're ignoring the epigenetics. So this is misleading statement number 12. And then this is one of their assignments. Explain the relationship between humans and mice. And what if somebody put down, well, God made God made humans and God made mice, and they all reproduce after their kind. Are they going to get any credit for that? And this is what they say. You know, this is what they want from their blind chance perspective. They're distantly related. Yeah, what's the distant relative between a mouse and a person? That takes a lot of imagination. Genetic testing, and that's actually not true. There's a lot of things that the tree doesn't work for. Fossils of common ancestors, you know, it's just a common designer, not ancestor. And then comparative anatomy, that's homology. And you look at genetically, bats and whales have identical genes specifying echolocation. Identical. What's their common ancestor? So it's like, I think God had a toolbox. He had genes for echolocation, and he threw some in a bat, and he threw some in a whale. You know, why reinvent the wheel? But so they come up with convergent evolution, explains similarities between unrelated mechanisms. Well, that's a word, but that doesn't show how it happened. It's like they say that, you know, millions of years, billions of years, anything can happen. It's like, no, time is a variable. It's not a mechanism. The mutations aren't going to do it, so they've got this common ancestor. No, it's a common designer. That's a belief system. Again, common ancestor, it's the designer. And this one talks about the concept of homology is the idea that evolution uses the same parts or the same building blocks to build the different structures. Do you see the logical fallacy there? Does evolution or homology use things? Does homology build things? No, that's that same reification logical fallacy. So that's false statement number 13. And it goes on to say we can find the spur, this little white piece right here. That's what's left of the pelvis or the hip bone of the snake from its lizard ancestors. So snakes had legs is what they're saying, and that's another belief system. And Dr. Jerry Bergman, he actually found uses for those spurs. It helps them when they're climbing, and also it's also when mating too. And then those spurs only come out when they're breeding. So they're not leftovers from when they had legs. Let's take a look at the development of Earth. Now, is this science right here? The universe sprang into existence 13 billion years ago? Just sprang into existence? No, that's not science. And then these clouds of gas and dust from the Big Bang, gravity pulled the cooling matter into piles, clumping it together into dense knots. As the pressure increased, so did the temperature of these knots, and the first stars were born. Okay, is that science? Have we ever seen any star born? No. And what they're not telling you is that violates the Boyle's law. As the pressure, as the mass, as it condenses, the area decreases, the pressure is going to increase. And who is it? Gary Parker. He was going through grad school, and they're talking about this nebula theory about the dust cloud collapsing, and he goes, how does that work? Because gravity is, gas pressure is 60 to 100,000 times stronger than gravity. And the professor looks at him and says, well, maybe instead of the nebulous theory, they should call it the nebula theory, meaning hard to understand. And then it says the Earth's oldest rock was discovered in 2008 along Hudson Bay. So in 2008, they found the Earth's oldest rock, but then in 2019, NASA came out and said the Earth's oldest rock was found on the moon. Yeah, found on the moon, and I was in the science department. That's what we're talking about next hour. You know, the next session is going to be how that rock got on the moon, and it's going to make perfect sense. And it's gonna make perfect sense. It will. And I told the school board, it's like your kids would love to learn a theory that would explain this and make accurate predictions. And I'm just appalled at the lack of curiosity at St. Cloud State and in our public schools. They don't want to know a theory that's making accurate predictions. They just are going to teach what the sacred cow says. And this rock crystallized about 12 miles beneath the Earth's surface. And again, the hydroplate theory explains it perfectly. And that's what they're finding. And so the Earth's oldest rock was found in 2008. Well, according to NASA, that's false statement number 14. We're getting up there. And then it says Earth, it was molten at one time, you know, but the Bible says it was underwater, so that's not molten. It would all turn to steam. So let's look at igneous rock. Okay, granite is an igneous rock. And igneous rocks form from molten material. Okay, and it cools and it hardens. Well, Dr. Walt Brown says, had Earth ever been molten, its dense, non-radioactive chemical elements, such as gold, would have sunk to the Earth's core. Gold is 70% denser than lead, and yet it is found on the Earth's surface. And it goes on to say, if melted granite slowly cooled, the first because granite's made of four things. It's like mica, feldspar, hornblende, and quartz, and they all have different specific densities. And he says the first mineral to solidify would sink to the bottom of the melt if it were denser than the melt, or it would float on top of the melt if it were less dense than the melt. A layer cake of minerals would form instead of granite, which is a granular mixture of minerals. Therefore, the entire Earth was never molten. Okay, it was never molten. They can't make granite. You know, and then this is Robert Gentry, Life's Tiny Mysteries. They find polonium halos in granite, and the half-life of that is 3 minutes. So they say it's like finding Alka-Seltzer bubbles in ice. It had to flash freeze it. That's what happened with granite. It cooled rapidly, not over millions of years or slowly. And this PhD from Penn State says, I support his 20-year-old challenge, as yet unmet, the scientific establishment that it produced in the laboratory even a fist-sized piece of granite and the subsequent production of the polonium halo in it. So he's saying, prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. If I'm wrong, make granite with these halos in it. And so this is Prove It, number 15, the evidence of plate tectonics. The convection currents, which are an important part of the theory of how seafloor spreading works. So plate tectonics, let's say the Earth is broken into plates, and then one plate is diving under the other. And they need to have that to keep their billions of years. But then Christians, they just speed it up. And they just take a secular model, speed it up, and call it catastrophic plate tectonics. It all happened during the flood. But then, you know, it's kind of like taking a secular model, evolution, and slapping a cross on it and saying, oh, it's theistic evolution. These are secular models that are not valid. And next hour we'll show you, I think, a more biblical view of the flood. Okay, and it's got these convection currents. It's kind of like water boiling. It gets warms up, goes up, then cools off, comes down. But there's a book, 20 Reasons to Question Plate Tectonics, and subduction doesn't work. How do you get that thing to start diving underneath another one, you know, without crushing it or ripping it apart? And then there's this crossover depth, crossover density. And this is Walt Brown, and he's a brilliant guy. He says, rocks that melt under the extreme pressure of more than 220 miles below the Earth's surface will contract. And magma below this depth of about 220 miles is too dense to rise, so magma cannot circulate inside the mantle, contrary of what's been taught for 50 years. So there are some big problems with this plate tectonics, and it doesn't, I mean, you can imagine it to be true, but this is, again, prove it. If you're going to teach it, prove it. And then understanding our universe. Yeah. One of the biggest mysteries of the universe is how the entire universe inflated at an extremely high rate from a point smaller than a single atom to the size of a baseball. This mystery continues to plague scientists, but the laws of physics do allow for such an event. And it's like, what laws of physics allow that? Because I always thought the Big Bang broke the first law of thermodynamics. Matter can't get matter from nothing. And so it's like, how do they have this? And then energy, and they talk about the first law, energy can be neither created nor destroyed, and matter can be changed from one energy to the other, like matter to energy, like an atomic bomb, or those particle accelerators, they get them going so fast together, they slam them into each other, and they get more particles. But you can't get it from nothing. You had to have something to begin with. And it says, scientists use these two laws to explain how the energy from the expansion of a singularity can form the matter of the universe. And I'm scratching my head, where does it do that? But this is how they do it. It finally made sense. Some have found contradictions between the laws of conservation of energy and the Big Bang. Yeah, I'm one of them, since neither address where the singularity of condensed energy originated. However, this is how they get away with it, the Big Bang theory only refers to the time after the singularity began to expand. So the Big Bang, it starts after the matter's there. That's like evolution starts after life began. And so that's why when I debated a science teacher in April, it's like, we're going to debate the proper perspective of the past. I'm not debating evolution, because they'll say, oh, that's after life began. I'm not debating the Big Bang. It's like, I don't care what you call your theory. At some point in time, you have to have matter from nothing, and you have to have life from non-life, and that's what we're going to debate. And so we did. Yeah, and then they have to invent, they have to imagine, and you're going to see some of these things on this handout. Make sure everybody gets a handout. There's so many rescuing devices they have to imagine to be true to keep their blind chance perspective alive. And they need some sort of invisible matter. See, spiral galaxies, they should wind up in millions of years. We shouldn't still have spiral galaxies if they're millions of years old. So they imagine some sort of invisible matter. These stars would not continue to follow their orbits. They call it dark matter. It's never been observed. The light goes right through it. It's never been observed. You've never seen it. You just imagine it. Dark matter accounts for about 23% of the mass energy in the universe. So 23%. And then you've got the universe expanding at an accelerating rate. The expansion of the universe provides strong evidence for the Big Bang. Well, no, it's the same thing for God. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and he stretched out the heavens. And this says that the expansion of the universe was actually accelerating. So how's that happening? Unknown cosmic force that is counteracting gravity. They call it dark energy, which is 73% of the known universe. So you take 23% plus 73% of stuff that's never been observed, you get 96%. And if your theory is supposed to explain everything and you can only explain 4%, it's time to get a different theory, and that's a big problem for them. Okay, and then they think that hydrogen started first and it cooled off to form helium, and that cooled off to form lithium. And so I had a question at the fair. Did hydrogen and helium turn into people? And I took a tally. I love doing those surveys, and at the fair it was yes, 52 people said, and no, 161 said, and don't know, 45. And I had that question on my bike at St. Cloud State. It said, did hydrogen and helium really turn into people? And a professor walks by and he says, no, hydrogen and helium didn't turn into people. And I said, well, what did the Big Bang make? And he didn't say anything. So I said, hydrogen, helium, and a little bit of lithium. And he goes, yeah, and those things got together and made stars that made the elements that turned into people. It's like, there's a lot of imagination there. Just prove it. And I did the same survey at St. Cloud State. Did hydrogen and helium turn into people? And most people think no. It was real close all day, and the yeses had it, and then 4 people came by, and then it was no. So they're not buying this Big Bang baloney. So let's just wrap up real quickly. You probably figured out that water equals life. Well, that's false. Over millions of years, that process can lead to living organisms. That's false. And they ended up interacting with each other and forming more and more complex molecules, and they start to replicate. That's false. Only 1.6% different. That's false. We saw how they manipulated the data there. And then also this Haeckel's embryos, that's false. And they call us animals, and that's false. And they don't have a real an idea of how the scientists haven't been able to come up with a working hypothesis as to why our retinas are set up backwards. That's false. And they don't have a nearly almost complete skeleton of Lucy. And then this tree of life is false, according to Stephen Jay Gould. And then this is a misleading statement about species adapt to their environment because they're not looking at epigenetics and sensors. And then the Earth's oldest rock was discovered in 2008 in Hudson Bay. That's false, and we're going to learn why next hour. And then the convection currents, yeah, prove it. That stuff's going to sink. It's not coming back up. And then granite's an igneous rock. Prove it. Let's see it molten. And so we do all that to get to this. Widespread belief systems seldom change when frequently reinforced by influential institutions, such as universities, media, religious institutions, and the scientific and intellectual elite. That's what we have. We have a widespread belief system that's based on blind chance. You know, it's like thinking this building got put together by blind chance. That's absurd. And yet how much more absurd to think our bodies got put together by chance. And yet if that's all people see, they just memorize, they don't think. And that's what I see a lot of at St. Cloud State. Kids know what to think, they just don't know how to think. And then when I meet somebody who can think, it's like, where'd you go to school? Oh, I was homeschooled 90% of the time. Okay, but that's what's happening. And it's like the emperor who has no clothes. You know, everybody's just playing along so they don't lose their job. But when a vast number of people realize that they've been misled, an intellectual revolution begins. And that's what I'm trying to do. Get as many people as possible to realize we've been misled. You know, there's a lot of, I was an evolutionist until I saw the creation model when I was 32. No, I was almost 40. Talk about a best kept secret in America. And so that's what we need to do. We need to help people see that there's a creator. Because if they reject the creator, what chance do they have of putting their faith in God's Son, Jesus, to pay for their sins? And then they spend an eternity in hell. And one time, yeah, I got it. What was it? It was a psychology major at St. Cloud State asked me, why am I doing there? Sometimes I say, well, I'm just here to give you an opportunity to think. You need to see both sides so you can think. But this time I asked, well, if you saw a blind person walking towards a cliff, would you warn them? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, well, that's what I see. I see blinded people who are walking towards a cliff, and if they go off without Jesus, they're going to spend an eternity in hell. And I don't want that, and God doesn't want that, but they can choose that. But if they choose that, they're going to have to walk by me, and they're going to have to consciously reject Jesus Christ. And so that's what motivates me. I've got a YouTube channel called Solidify Your Faith. Got a couple of videos back there. These are thank yous for a donation of any amount. I was at the fair one time, and a kid says, is a penny enough? And I said, any amount, take one. And so, yeah, we want people to get all the information. And with that, yeah, we got a minute left. Does anybody have a question or two or anything? All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, Pastor. I hope it was worth your while. And I look forward to talking about how that rock got on the moon. It is going to be a lot of fun.